Okay, another lecture from my basement. I'm going with this computer this time because I'm going to be using some YouTube references throughout this lecture. So this lecture has to do with training principles, specifically overload, variety, and specificity. I'll be applying most of this to weight training, but you can apply these principles to almost any type of activity. So strength training principles, overload. Strength training must be progressively more and more difficult for adaptations to occur. So you have to make your workouts more and more difficult in order to see gains in muscle mass and strength. And this is achieved progressively by increasing the amount of weight lifted or the volume of exercise, which refers to sets and repetitions. Or you could decrease your rest periods between sets. So anything to make your training sessions more and more difficult as you go on. This shows kind of the physiology behind the overload principle. So this is what happens if you lift the same weights before and after weeks of training. So initially your muscle fibers will probably increase in size a bit, but as you continue to lift the same load, you will start to become more efficient at lifting that load, and you will require less motor unit activation to lift the same load. So the activated muscle fibers are represented by the striped muscle fibers, and you can see the right-hand side, you have less activation of muscle fibers if you're lifting the same load after weeks of training. So this is why it's important to keep increasing the load that you're lifting or make it more difficult to increase your motor unit recruitment. The principle of overload. So as you progress through a resistance training program, your muscles become more efficient and a lower motor unit recruitment is needed to lift the same weight. So this is a summary of the previous slide. During training, you must progressively increase the amount of load experienced by your muscle to keep motor recruitment high. And the principle of overload is also referred to as progressive overload, because you start easy in your training program and then you progress to more and more difficult loading situations. Some examples of methods to achieve overload. So there's forced repetitions, and then there's eccentrics and isometrics. So I talked about eccentrics and isometrics a little bit earlier in the course. I'm going to give you a quick video of what's meant by forced repetitions. So anyone that's involved in resistance training probably uses this practice, but this is just a video of someone doing arm curls in the gym, and they're using this forced repetition technique. So that essentially it involves lifting a weight on your own until you reach close to a period of failure, so you can't lift the weight anymore. And then you get a partner to move in here to help you lift the barbell for 2 or 3 more repetitions. And that's what's meant by forced repetitions, is getting a partner to assist with 2 or 3 additional repetitions so you get an extra load on your muscles. So that's what's meant by forced repetitions. Eccentrics. I went over this in detail earlier in the course, and I gave examples, some video examples of people doing eccentric exercises. The advantages of using eccentrics is that you can get good overload because you get high tension produced in your muscle, and therefore better hypertrophy and strength gains with training. And eccentric contractions are important in many sports. Any sports that involve landing, changes of direction, those types of sports involve eccentrics. The disadvantage, and again, this is something that we covered earlier in the course, if you're not used to doing eccentric contractions, there's that phenomena of delayed onset muscle soreness. So your muscles are going to feel sore the next day if you're not used to doing eccentric work, and that's going to make you less able to exercise at the same intensity. But that soreness decreases as you as you repeat your training sessions with eccentric loading. The last one it refers to isometrics. So this is generation of force without movement. Advantages here. First, you get more forceful contraction than concentric contractions. So isometrics are kind of the middle, most forceful contractions. So concentric are your weakest, isometric are your next strongest, and then eccentric are your next strongest. So if you can use isometric contractions during your training, you can elicit quite a high force output with your muscles and achieve a good overload that way. Other advantages to using isometrics is it's specific to certain sports. So I've got some examples here. A lot of holds in gymnastics, like this one, require high isometric strength. So, someone training with gymnastics, to achieve these holds, they would have to train isometrically. And then a sport such as wrestling, a good example of isometrics here is the girl on the bottom here. She's trying to prevent being turned over by the girl on the top. So she doesn't want to be turned to her back. And she would have to rely on the isometric strength in her arm and her leg to prevent from being turned over onto her back. So this is another good example of how isometrics might be important in a sport-specific situation. And the last thing about isometrics is it can train you to overcome sticking points in your range of motion when doing a lift. And again, I have a quick YouTube video on this. So in this video, this person's going to be doing a set of repetitions of bench press. But you can see they have these stoppers built into the rack, and those stop the bar so that he's going to be performing an isometric movement at that point in his range of movement. So he's training his strength specifically at that point in his range of movement. So that might be the sticking point in his inability to lift the barbell on a heavy lift. And so he's training his strength at that specific point, providing overload to his muscles because you do get that greater force production with the isometric contraction. But that's just a way that you can achieve overload in the weight room. So that's using those stoppers in a squat rack.
Congratulations on...
Yeah. Back to the PowerPoint. So to achieve optimal hypertrophy, you want to train all the muscles or muscle fibers or motor units in a muscle. So a typical weightlifting set usually involves lifting a weight for about 8 to 10 repetitions. The question here is what type of motor unit would be recruited first, and then what type of motor unit would fatigue first during the 8 to 10 repetitions. So the type of motor unit that would be recruited first is your type 1 or slow twitch fibers. So recall that those smaller motor units are recruited first during almost any type of activity. But what type of motor unit would fatigue first? The answer here is your type 2 or fast twitch motor units. They're the most fatigable. So this diagram shows you motor unit recruitment during a typical set of resistance training. And here I have the first repetition plotted, the fourth repetition, and the 8th repetition. The gray dots represent motor units that have been recruited but not exhausted, and then the black dots represent motor units that have been recruited and exhausted. So what you have here is your fast twitch or your big motor units. You can see that they're recruited after the slow twitch, but they will fatigue first. So by the end of your 8 repetitions, your fast twitch are mostly fatigued, whereas most of your slow twitch have not yet been fatigued. So, weightlifting to exhaustion is recommended that you perform your weightlifting sets to exhaustion, and that will allow greater motor unit recruitment. And the question here is how can you achieve complete exhaustion of the remaining slow motor units that are not yet exhausted at the end of your set? So we're talking about these motor units here? And the answer here is that you can lower your resistance and then continue with another set of repetitions right away. And then keep lowering your resistance until you get to a really light weight and you've completely exhausted your muscle. So that type of strategy would help to recruit those slow twitch motor units and get optimal overload for all your motor units within your muscle. Frequency of training. So this is another component of training. What is the recommended frequency for strength training workouts? In general, they recommend training major muscle groups at the most every second day. So to get about 48 hours of rest between your muscle groups. And that's essential for recovery, but it's also good for optimal overload. So this graph shows you it's from a study that looked at muscle protein synthesis after finishing a resistance training session. So this is at rest. This is 3 hours after the session, 24 hours after the session, and then 48 hours. So this would indicate that after you do a resistance training session, your muscle protein synthesis gets turned on for 48 hours after that session and then comes back to baseline. So that's when you want to hit your muscle again to get another increase in protein synthesis. So this recommended 48 hours or 2 days or training every second day for each muscle group is based on optimal recovery, but also optimal stimulation of protein synthesis. And last thing I have for you here is, I've been talking about overload with regards to strength training. This would be an example of an overload in a sport, just using different implements in the sport. And this is from the sport of baseball. So you can see they've got these things called a pancake glove for fielding drills. So this is a flat glove that's different from a regular baseball mitt. It makes it more difficult to field the baseball, and by making it more difficult, it just provides overload to your nervous system and your your brain. To enhance your ability to field a baseball. So you'll see the use of the pancake glove in this video.
Hey, what's up? I'm gonna show you a few drills that you can do with the pancake glove. Coming through it, the first drill that you're gonna see is straight on, and then back step, and then backhand, glove side and backhand. And you're going to see me popping the ball off of the glove and catching it on both ways. This is not to practice flipping the ball out of your glove in the game. What it's practicing is having a good glove angle when the ball hits and having soft hands. Have a little receiving with it. And you want that ball just to pop up a little bit so you can catch that. Same thing here. Being soft with it and have a good catch, okay? Then we've got a few where we're coming through the ball, staying low, walking through it forward, walking through it backwards, fielding it. And then also coming forward, getting through the ball, getting around it, and under control going back. This is like Black Friday.
So here's a situation where he's applying even more overload. You can see in the video he's got a buddy that has a tether cord that's like an elastic tether cord, and that's providing resistance to his movements, just to provide more overload for this activity. So there you got an idea of overload using different sport implements. Okay. And the last strength training principle here is the principle of variety. Or sorry, it's the second one. So we've covered overload. This is the principle of variety. And then again, this is to get optimal recruitment and training of your muscle. So your exercises must be changed frequently, and it's the most violated principle of strength training. So when we're on a strength training program, we tend to stick to our favorite exercises, but it's important to change up your exercises because anytime you change something about an exercise, it changes the muscle groups that are recruited or the motor units within the muscle group that are recruited. So a good example would be one of your labs when you assessed EMG activity, doing push-ups or doing arm curls, and you can see by the way you change your hand spacing for the push-ups or your grip during the arm curl, how it changed your motor unit recruitment. This is another example of incorporating variety. So we have two exercises. One is the dip exercise on the left-hand side, and the other one is the bench press on the right-hand side. Both train the chest muscles or the pectorals, but I'm trying to schematically represent the muscle fibers that are recruited in each exercise. So each exercise will recruit a different set of muscle fibers within that muscle group. So to get overall, good hypertrophy of a muscle, it would be important to include a wide variety of exercises for each muscle group. And variety can be introduced by changing different things. So changing your grip, your positioning, your type of exercises, your speed of contraction. So faster speeds of contraction are going to increase recruitment of your fast twitch motor units, contraction type, and then repetitions or load. So lower repetitions, and higher load, you're going to be recruiting more your fast twitch fibers. Higher repetitions, lower loads, you're going to be recruiting more your slow twitch muscles and motor units. This is the third strength training principle, specificity. So specificity states that training must match sport performance as closely as possible. So this includes contraction type, repetition, speed, or movement pattern. So you're trying to, this is almost the exact opposite of variety. So you're trying to make your movements as specific as possible to your sport situation. And again, I've got a YouTube video to show you some examples here. So this is specificity in the weight room and applying it to the sport of rugby. And so we're looking at Hubert Bidens here, who's a prop, or was a prop for Team Canada, and he's from Saskatchewan.
Strength. Rugby is a sport where you obviously need a lot of strength. Each position is slightly different. For my position, we like to focus a lot on the scrum. It requires a lot of core strength, lower back, obviously leg strength, and then your neck takes a lot of pounding. Just heading to the gym right now. I'll show you a couple exercises that we like to do to get the game ready. One of the things we like to do is just some quarter squat isometric holds. The reason only a quarter squat is it kind of mimics the perfect scrumming position, and also it's a lot easier on your knee joints than if going full. First thing, you want to just address the bar. Make sure you keep your lats good and tight, tighten up the core, and then just sink down, making sure not to flare out your knees, keeping the core tight, keeping the lats nice and tight, making sure everything's good. Hold for about 4 or 5 seconds, and then just extend out, take a deep breath, core out again, and then repeat that 5 or 6 times. So this exercise is the diagonal or D lunge. Essentially the same thing as the squat, just keep everything tight, take a 45-degree step, and then really explode back out, and then alternate. And this definitely helps us strengthen lateral movement, because it's pretty rare in rugby where you're just running straight or tackling straight. There's oftentimes you'll have to go off to one side or the other. This allows for a little bit of sideways movement. Typically we would do 4 to 6 a leg, and then that would be one set. This next exercise is back extensions. Really strengthen the lower back aspect of the core and the glutes. Particularly important in the scrummaging aspect of the game. Allows you to transfer forces through you onto the opposition and through the opposition onto your players so that you don't crumble, basically. Stay as straight as possible and then just dip down and back up. If you want to make it more difficult, put your hands over your head. Go for 12 to 15 reps and then repeat that for 3 or 4 sets. Start with body weight to warm everything up and then pick up a kettlebell. The stronger and fitter you are, the easier it is when it comes to game time. So put the work in the gym.
There you go, a highly motivational video for you. Okay, so I've got some questions here for you. For any athlete match, the training principle with the that would be most important for different parts of the training year. And what I'll do is I'm going to just pause this and I'll continue it with part 2 of the video.